We do encourage you, I really hope that you all find time to meet with each other and talk and have dinner and drinks and really sort of enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, how I define digital rhetoric probably has changed this weekend. It's a moving target.
Question of the hour is whether it's simply another episode in a continuous history of rhetoric, or whether it marks some kind of rupture.
I tend to say that it's studying discourse in digital spaces.
And what I typically do when I talk to students about this is I say, rhetoric itself is concerned with discourse and however you want to look at it, right? And so if we think about the digital, it's just a new form of discourse. And so digital rhetoric is inherently tied with the forms of transferring discourse back and forth for communicative purposes.
I'm just going to go Aristotle on this one. It's discovering the available means of persuasion in, around, through digital spaces.
I think about it maybe in a fairly traditional sense, in that I think about digital rhetoric as a field of study as wanting to contribute to a set of scholarly conversations about rhetoric, using digital means to kind of explore those boundaries, to maybe push them back a little bit, maybe to reinforce some things that we've known for some time.
For me, rhetoric is really a process of creating immersive, suasive environments based on data from the world that then feeds back onto one or more participants within a space or who are engaging with an object.
Moving images, text, discursive, non-discursive, sound, cut and paste, you name it. And can we figure out some kind of rigor, rules, guides to help us use it more effectively?
I think that the rise of ubiquitous computing is going to require some rethinking, particularly of our theoretical frameworks. And when technology becomes an actor, how do we understand rhetorical activity differently?
The Electronic Literature Organization uses this definition that talks about the computer being sort of essential to the meaning-making process. I think digital rhetoric could maybe think along these terms as well.
It's an art, a practice, a theory, a phenomenon that can be researched. So it assumes a public, it assumes an audience, it assumes a rhetor, it assumes some agency.
Ideally, what happens to the digital is that it eventually just vanishes off the name. That everyone who practices humanities is practicing digital humanities. And I think you could say the same thing about digital rhetoric.
A rough distinction that might not necessarily be fair. Digital humanities is sort of more hermeneutic, so it's more sort of analytical, whereas digital rhetoric seems to be more interested in production.
I think rhetoric historically has always been interested in not just using the tools to analyze, of digital humanities to analyze big swaths of text, but to also produce new arguments through them to make new things.
I think digital humanities is an attempt to sort of frame a moment, that is to understand that all these processes of making are kind of happening all around us, that we don't only study the artifacts of those things, but maybe the practices too.
There was this nice visual at Seas that someone did about, under the circus tent, because everyone can do digital humanities work. And then the other tent was actually no, only those who code and the coders can do and be digital humanists or do digital humanities work. So I think that I'm somewhere in between there, trying to understand what that story is.
So I think we do the same types of things. We study digital texts, we make digital texts, we use digital texts to get at new research questions. But it's sort of two different conversations happening that overlap a little bit is how I would characterize it.
I don't want to sound flippant about this, but it's not a particularly interesting question to me because I don't think digital humanities is a field, but I think digital rhetoric is a field. Digital rhetoric has a core, a central theory, and a central method, right? We have a place that we can say this is where digital rhetoric starts and works from. Digital humanities is kind of an agglomeration of methods applied to digital products, but there's no core there, right? It's just a way of describing kind of a new ways of thinking about methodology across a broad range of humanities subjects or humanities disciplines.
I think actually we get a bit too hung up on the sort of distinction between digital rhetoric and digital humanities, and I think it sort of ends up in this cul-de-sac conversation. I also think it's bound up with lots of discussions about the difference between rhetoric and writing, and literature. and I'm not really invested in refighting all of those fights. So I basically, my argument, and I will sort of make a piece of this argument today during my presentation, is to just forget that altogether and to stop trying to distinguish digital rhetoric from digital humanities.
That's a really interesting question because it really depends on what emphasis you want to place on rhetorician. Are you talking about simply people who are practitioners? Or are you talking about practitioners who attempt to understand the practice, theorize, and discuss its issues?
You know, this is really funny because this may be my thing. Like, I always kind of thought it was funny when people call themselves rhetoricians, because to be a rhetorician assumes that you're engaging in some kind of practice of rhetoric. And when you look at people who call themselves rhetoricians, they most often are just scholars, right? So when you say what is a digital rhetorician, for me, that assumes one is engaging in the connection between scholarly thinking and practice.
Interest in seeing the kinds of rhetorical inquiry or study that we can apply to digital media is really where I think we can have the most productive discussion for what digital rhetoric could be, and then the kinds of individuals involved in exploring that space.
I guess you just say, digital rhetorician, become one. I don't know, it's kind of magic.
Last night, Justin made the observation that there were 3 rhetoricians that helped define this area of inquiry, if you will. Lannon, Zappin, and Losch.
I would probably use Liz Losch's Hacking Aristotle chapter from Virtualpolitik.
I suppose if I had to pick just like one, then I would say the sections of Liz Losch's Virtualpolitik that talk about digital rhetoric.
I'm very excited about Doug Iman's book on digital rhetoric.
And the one book I keep coming back to is Colin Brooks' Lingua Fracta.
We're reading Colin Brooks.
I would pick Colin Brooks' Lingua Fracta.
I think it does a fantastic job of taking classical rhetoric and folding it right into new media technologies.
I'm a fangirl of Jody Shipka, so I've told everyone to read Towards a Composition Made Whole.
But I quite like something like what Jody Shipka does with Composition Made Whole.
Benjamin and Heidegger, McLuhan.
The one book I'd always have them read is McLuhan's Understanding the Media, right? Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man.
Very influenced by Marshall McLuhan's work. I had my students read about half of Jeff Rice's Digital Detroit.
If I really did choose one, the person that keeps coming to mind, which is odd, is Lisa Nakamura.
Victor Vitanza and Craig Saper just came out with a collection called Electracy. Came out a couple months ago, and it's a compilation of Ulmer's works.
It has to be the work of Greg Ulmer.
I would choose Claire Lauer's What's in a Name.
Borges's Labyrinths.